All right, I'm going to start talking here, and I'm going to put up my "Can you hear me now" slide. This is a way to make sure that folks that are seeing the screen but maybe have an audio issue can hear. And I'm going to wait here about a minute or so as folks catch up on the screening to make sure that we can hear from everybody and get everybody involved. I see more people showing up, which is great. I'm talking to you here from Sherwood, Oregon, and we've got folks from, I see Washington, Texas, Michigan, Mexico, Delaware, all over the place. So excited to talk to you all. Probably a different audience that I've been speaking to lately, because I'm not talking about just wing T stuff. So go ahead, and if you can hear me, go ahead and chime in with a yes. Obviously, if you can't hear me, you'll hopefully see that and say no, but I'll just wait a few more minutes and we'll get started. All right. All right, well, let's roll. So first, let's make sure you're in the right place. So this clinic is for you if you're probably a youth football coach. Sometimes I get high school coaches at these things, but you're probably a youth coach wanting to improve your practice planning and execution. And my guess is you're either a head coach or an assistant that wants to take an active role in practice planning. And much of what I'm going to talk about here is focused on youth, because I think there's some unique constraints. I'm seeing that Gary can't hear. Let me just chat with him real quick. All right. All right, we're going to keep cranking ahead here. And first, just a little bit of background on me. I've been coaching for about 9 years. I'm in my 10th year, and I'm actually this year I'm going to be with the high school. But I had a big transition back in 2010. If you look to the left, I coached with a very close friend for 4 years, and we coached our boys from 3rd grade up into 7th grade, and which is up to about age 12. And he had a younger son and decided to go back down and coach 3rd grade, and I wanted to coach my younger son as he moved into the 8th grade level, and I switched over to coaching with the guys that you see on the right. And I had been responsible for practice planning. I kind of owned that with the guy on the left, and I was with some new guys on the right, and the guy who was the head coach in the middle was going to be responsible for practice planning. And it was like a complete reset. We had a different approach and philosophy. He wasn't maybe quite as organized as I was. Great coach, and somebody that I'm still coaching with today, and just one of my closest friends. But it was different. We weren't adjusted with each other, and it took about a year coaching together where as we started the next season, he turned to me and said, "Chris, you want to take over practice planning this year?" And I said, "Yes, I want to." So that's kind of the person I am. I'm a bit of a planner and controller, and we kind of learned respectively what our roles could be on the team, and I'll talk about that more in a bit. So things that I'm going to cover here, and we're going to do a quick survey here in a second, but I've got a few keys to success for practice planning at the youth level. First, the whole staff needs to be aligned, and you can't let issues linger. The head coach has to have a philosophy and a clear approach to how he's going to organize practices and the team in general. It takes planning. You can't wing this stuff. You might get away with that for a few practices here and there, but overall, you've got to plan, and you've got to stay at least a step ahead of the players and make sure that the coaches are on the same page. I think it's important to have a routine, but not too much of a routine. From time to time, you need to break it. Otherwise, the coaches and the kids both get tired of it. But a certain amount of consistency is really valuable. If you want the players to work at a fast pace, the coaches have to be willing to do that. If you want the players running around, I think the coaches need to be running around. And it's kind of a consistency that you don't ask the kids to do things that you're not going to do yourself as a coach. And lastly, I'm going to say stay on schedule. We're going to go into all these topics as we dive in on this. But first, let's do a quick poll. And when we do polls like this, what I like to do is I'm going to survey you. If you don't mind, I'd love you to run over and answer the question. The advantage is if you do it, you'll help share with other coaches. You'll give me more insight, and I'll try to share some of this at the very least with an email afterwards, and maybe even some real time by the end of it. So I've got a quick question for you to answer, which is, I'm very interested in how far in advance you typically prepare and distribute your practice plans for practice. So if you don't mind going over, doing a quick answer on that, it's, click two buttons and you're done. So try to do that, and we'll look at the answers in a little bit. So let's talk about the coaching staff being on the same page. This comes down to a few different areas. It involves the pace that you're going to run out, how you're going to run your drills. Does everybody know what the schedule is? Does everybody know what the objectives are for the week? What the objectives are for the day? Are you teaching with a consistent, positive, supporting approach? Do you have one coach who teaches by yelling and criticizing, and another one who's more of a nurturing coach? You need to set that tone and get everybody on the same page at the start of the season. Otherwise, even with the best planning, you're not going to be effective as a head coach or as a key assistant coach. And I would guess your team's not going to be very successful either. So when I think about planning, I like to look at it at 3 different levels. And you could even add a fourth level, kind of a step 0, which is, what are you trying to achieve as a team and as a coaching staff with the players you're working with? What are your goals for the overall season? But that's probably a topic for another web clinic. So at the practice planning level, we tend to look at things from what do we want to achieve for this week? And that's usually dictated by the game that we have coming up. Or it might be, if it's preseason, it might be where you want to be in your installation schedule, with your offense, your defense, your special teams. And then at the next level of detail, what do you want to achieve today? What are your goals for this given practice? And then down at the position coach level, because you're going to break things into position groups, whether it's offensive or defensive. And as a position coach, if you're running a drill, what are you trying to achieve with that? What's the goal of that drill or that group session that you're doing? What would success look like, and how are you gonna achieve that? So at the weekly level, we're not always terribly formal about this, but you're going to get some sample plans from me where I give you an example of what a weekly plan might look like. And if you're a youth coach, you probably, if it's preseason, you might be lucky and have 4, 5, or 6 practices in a week. If it's during the season, if you're anything like the league that I've coached in for years, you have about 3 practices to work on, and probably about 6 hours a week to do that. So to be effective with that, you better have some objectives. Where do you want to be by the end of the week, and what would success look like? And I'm a big fan of kind of visualizing, as I'm looking at that maybe Thursday or Friday practice before the game on the weekend. What would that pre-game practice look like? What would success look like? Is it, running running a pregame walkthrough or a 2-minute drill, and you just have complete success. You're able to run your base plays. Is it a defensive walkthrough, and you want to make sure you've got 3 key pre-snap recognitions that the defense should see, and that's really what you're hoping for. And this is something that you'll set ideally in a coach meeting, probably on the weekend, maybe Sunday, or maybe you do yours on Monday. And this is an example of what one might look like. And this would be kind of an early season. And the fact, this is straight from our week 1 installation last summer. And I was coaching 12, 13-year-olds. These are, pretty much all these kids have been in our system for a while, and we're able to run out at a pretty fast pace. So our goal at the end of that first week, and this, by the way, this first week is after we broke into teams, and we've already done kind of a camp ahead of time for a week. So we've been doing some amount of work already as we got into this. So we're not coming in cold. And we actually are hoping for 3 different, and I coach the wing tee, 3 different wing tee series installed by the end of that first week, which I would say for a younger team or an organization that's not used to running that, you'd probably just have one of those series as your goal. But we have a goal of having those 3. And on the defensive side, we want to have a 4-2-5 base alignment, just where do people line up, and a basic set of pass coverage, our cover 3 slide ready to roll. Special teams, none for that first week. We're not going to bother with it. We've got 3 weeks until our first game, and I'll talk more about special teams and youth football, but we're focusing exclusively on pure offense and defense at this point. So that was our plan for kind of that first week. So diving into the detail level, how much detail do you need for that individual practice plan? And the answer is it kind of depends. And I think the less time your staff has been together, the more detail you need. If you're 5 years into it, if you've been working with the same group of coaches for a while, and you really trust at the position level, you might be able to get by with a pretty high level breakdown with, hey, we're going to do kind of offensive line indie with 15 minutes and, work on your drills in there. And then, and I'll show you some example plans for that. If it's a new staff, I think you need to spend a lot more time on the details. And as a head coach, early on, and this is, I know this is difficult, because if you're a head coach in youth football, I guarantee you're probably a position coach also. You're coaching quarterbacks, you're coaching offensive line, you're coaching running backs, you're doing something else. And that said, you need to find time in your schedule when you can walk around and spend time observing and supporting the other coaches. You don't want to rely on just looking across the field or what the coach is telling you to see how they're performing in their drills, and you need to find time to get around. So here's an example of a more detailed plan, and this is pretty consistent with what I would be doing, particularly early in the season, because each year there may be 3 of us that are core coaches involved that have been together for a few years, but we always have 1 or 2 new coaches coming on board. So early on, things will be pretty detailed, and I've been the defensive coordinator for quite a while, so I'll tend to be pretty specific about different position groups and what I want to see within that indie period, within maybe a group period, and you can kind of see here the level of detail that I would get into. Where I get a little less specific is where I know I'm going to be running that whole period, and I may have my own detailed plan in place. Here, this next slide, you see an example of maybe something that's a little more open-ended, that might be later in the season, where, within the different position groups, I'm just calling out that we're going to do what we call EDDs, or everyday drills. We're going to work on tackling for that specific position. And I even say coach choice in some areas. And that's an example where you're really, you might have a quick chat before the practice, but you've essentially delegated to your defensive line coach that he's going to work on specific drills based on what we know about the next team that's coming up. All right, I got another quick poll for y'all. So give me a second here to pull this up. And I know one of you is having some problems with audio, and these things can be kind of tough, I know. But the best thing to do is maybe try a different browser or computer, and maybe things will work out for you. So here's the next poll coming up. In this one, I'm curious to hear from you. What's the biggest problem you've personally had with your practice planning? I love just kind of hearing problems that people have out there. It helps me, maybe these are some questions I can come and get back to. I don't mind if you give us a chat within the chat window about it, but go ahead and see if you can take a minute to go fill that out. Again, it's just a little bit of typing and click a button. Then we'll move on. Give me 1 second. And I know I probably didn't say this earlier, but if you have questions that come up during any of this, don't hesitate to just ask it. You don't need to hold it to the end. I may not answer it right away, but we'll make sure we get it on our list of questions to answer. All right, so I talked earlier about deciding on tempo and structure. I'm a big fan of running a very high tempo, fast-paced practice, and there's a few reasons for that. And it's not just because I'm from Oregon and we're going to do everything like the Ducks do it. If I was doing that, I certainly wouldn't be running the wing T. There's two reasons why I think tempo and pace are important in practice. One is it's a way to incorporate conditioning into practice without what I think are meaningless conditioning drills, and it's a way to keep focus for the kids. One thing I've started doing, and you're not going to see it in the sample plans that I've sent over because I've just started doing it with some clinics that I've been running this spring, is a team takeoff period, which we're doing right after our 6-minute warm-up period where we do dynamic warm-ups. And this is a sequence where we break into, it depends on how many kids you have. If you're like most youth teams, you're going to have somewhere from 20 to 30 kids on your team, so enough, hopefully, for 2 separate squads. And what we do is we run plays on air, and we run them out anywhere from 30 to 50 yards. So it's fast. It gets the kids conditioned, and it gets them focused because they're running plays. They're expected to line up and execute plays perfectly. We're not coaching execution at this point. We're just running plays as fast as we can, but we do that for about 7 to 10 minutes, and it's a great way to get off on the right foot in terms of focus and tempo. We do, I used to do water breaks maybe every 20 to 30 minutes and maybe do them for 5 minutes. And lately I've been doing more frequent breaks every 10 to 15 minutes, but I do them for 1 to 2 minutes. And basically the rule is you run back to your water, you get hydrated, and you run back to your station. There's no chit chat. There's no hanging around. The coaches are holding the kids accountable to come right back. And the kids, they know, they sprint out, they sprint back. Another way to maintain tempo is we talk less and do more reps. And it's not that we want imperfect reps. We want to always be improving them. But if you've been coaching youth for very long, you know that you have their attention when you're talking to them for about 30 seconds. So do a quick demonstration. You can talk to them about the purpose of the drill, but you get into it and allow them to make mistakes and do quick supportive corrections with each rep and give quick, short feedback on each rep. I also think I'm a big fan of doing more indie, which is kind of independent, very position-specific drills and smaller group drills and less team. And it's not that I don't think the team stuff is valuable, But the problem with team is that it's you've got all your coaches usually looking at all the kids, and you're getting less individual coaching. There's more standing around. It's harder to keep everything organized, and the bigger the group gets, the less number of reps you're going to get, and the harder it is to get that individual instruction. So the best coaching you're going to do is going to be in those independent and group periods. So I'm a firm believer in staying on schedule. That means starting on time and ending on time. That means your practice starts on time, and you respect the kids and the parents and your other coaches, and you end on time. We are religious about this. We are if the practice ends at 9 o'clock at night, because we practice later with the older kids, we are in our final huddle with the coaches at 8:58, and we're clapping and getting the kids off the field at 9 o'clock. And what that means is that the parents know they need to be there on time to pick up their kids. When you run 10 minutes late, what do parents start doing? They start showing up late, and then you're having to sit there with Jimmy for 15 minutes, waiting for his parents to show up to pick him up. So you start on time, you end on time, and somebody on your staff, or if you have a parent that's going to sit in their lawn chair and watch every practice, and everybody has one, maybe you give them something to do. Give them a horn or a whistle and a schedule, and tell them when they need to blow the whistle. Give them a stopwatch or a digital clock, and have them blow the whistle for transitions, and hold everybody accountable for hitting those transitions and staying on schedule. And kind of on the topic of coach chats, 1 or 2 minutes at the end of practice is enough. You're going to lose the kids beyond that. There may be special circumstances. Maybe you're into your final big playoff game or championship game, or you've had an issue you're working on, or maybe a kid broke his arm at the last practice and you want to talk to the kids about that. There are exceptions, but by and large, quick chat and get the kids out of there. All right, so let's talk about division of responsibilities here a bit. I've been a co-head coach for the last 9 years, and by co-head coach, I'm kind of the first assistant. I'm the main other guy, and that's been true with, you saw those 2 photos with the first guy and the second guy. All these 9 years I've been coaching, and I've not been the face of the team to the parents. There's good reason for that. I'm not very good at that. And I'm the key back office guy. I'm the guy that does the practice planning. I'm the guy that does all the work in huddle. I do most of the scouting work. I do the timekeeping during practice, and I'm the defensive coordinator. The head coach that I've been partnered with has been responsible for parent management, dealing with discipline issues with kids, walking around, hiring and firing coaches, and being the offensive coordinator and play caller. So if you're a head coach or a main assistant, finding somebody like this is a great recipe for success. Our high school runs the same way here in Sherwood. We have a face of the program, but he's the first to tell you that he's had a co-head coach with him for over 20 years that is critical to success. And if you can find an arrangement like that, and find kind of that wonder twin that can be with you, whether you're going to be like me and be the behind the scenes guy or the head coach guy, it can be really important, because it's very hard to carry all this on your own. And I know that one of you asked if I don't have enough coaches, and I'm going to get into some of that in a little bit. It's hard. All right, so let's. This one's a little bit random, but I want to talk about one of the best, because we're talking about practice planning and making your schedule. The best improvement I've made in the last 3 years, and I didn't used to do this, is scripting out pretty much everything. What you're looking at here is what I would do as a defensive coordinator, scripting out the plays for the scout offense and working on my defensive alignments. And we script everything out, and the reason is that I want to see the play from my opponent, or in this case, this is actually from early in the season where we're practicing against an invisible opponent and just working against looks against different formations. I want to practice how we line up, and I want to know exactly what I'm going to be looking for. And I might even put another column after that defense call that you see that gives me a reminder with what I'm looking for when I go through each of these plays. It takes the thinking out of it. I don't have to remember the calls. I just make the call from the script, and I go straight to my defensive call and call that in with a signal, and then I know exactly what I'm looking for. Likewise, on the other side of the ball, this is a sample script that my co-head coach made, which is exactly what we're going to work through in a scripted Team O series with the plays that we're going to run and our calls, because we use a no huddle with risk coach, so he's got the call right there, and we set this up both to cover the plays we want to cover, but we also are trying to make sure that we're covering all the right players, and as we do substitutions, that we're going to get the right reps in for the players as we work through this. So along with the scripting, this is an example of how I would build the scout offense play cards. And one of the best defensive purchases I've made in the last few years was a 353 installation manual from CoachXO.com. Shane Sams, who's just a great coach, great guy, and he did something that's just brilliant. He made basically a whole set of play cards that have just different route packages, and he numbers all of the eligible receivers, backs and wide receivers and tight ends. And I have these cards laminated, and especially early in the season when I'm working against just different routes and different formation looks, I just bring these out, and I can bring my Scouto together and say, you're number 1, you're 2, you're 3, you're 4, you're 5. And kids know exactly where to go. They can just look at the card, they see the number, and then we do the same thing when we're working with a scout offense situation, and we're working. This is an actual team that we played last year and one of their plays, and they get used to that whole routine. And then I have the play number in the upper left, the same call. It's going to correspond to my scripted call sheet, and then the kids can execute this play. They don't always do it perfectly, but we're trying to set them up for success. All right, just have to take a drink there. All right, so some of you might be from the 80s like I am, and these are some things I can do without. So maybe you recognize the song. Weird, obscure reference there, sorry. So I'm not a big fan of scrimmaging with other teams. That kind of goes into the category of my aversion to doing a lot of team practice time. I'm okay with this early in the season. It can help if you don't have a jamboree set up where you get a little bit of scrimmage practice time before your first game. It can be helpful to get a sense of game speed and what that situation is going to be like. But I would never do this after my first game of the season. You're stealing practice time. For many coaches, it's an excuse not to make a plan because it eats up so much time. I mean, you got to set up the teams and get going, and Jimmy or Joe's going to get hurt. And it's just, your time is too precious to waste time on that. Number 2 on my list is drills with 1 player active and 10 standing in line waiting for a rep. And we're going to get to this in a little bit with if you don't have enough coaches. If you got 25 kids and only 2 coaches, you're going to have a lot of this. So you got to find ways to mitigate that, and I'll give some strategies for that. Assistant coaches that don't prepare. If you've coached for a while, you've seen this, and not every we're all paid the same amount to coach youth football, which is nothing. In fact, it costs us money to do it. And not everybody's going to have the same kind of investment. I will say that I'd rather have 3 assistant coaches that are invested than 5 that are just in halfway. And as you set the tone at the start of the season about expectations and commitment. Investment doesn't mean that somebody needs to spend 6 hours on Sunday watching film. It means that they're at least going to spend a half hour before practice knowing what they're going to run and how they're going to run it and being prepared, and not showing up to the field 5 minutes before practice starts going, what's the plan today? Next on my list is non-specific feedback to players. When I talk about giving feedback on reps, find specific either praise or some constructive criticism that you can give to each player, whether it's, their fit or technique or that first step, body position, keeping their head up. Always find little things and keep it specific. This kind of gets into my team thing. 60 minutes of team offense where you're running your number ones against the scout defense, and those are all your number twos and backups. That's a great way to make sure that those number twos don't come back and play again. And having been around the high school program here for a long time, and both my sons played through the high school, a lot of those number twos end up being studs when they get to high school. So making sure you balance time and you're focused on the right things with the right intention for those players. All right, so these are some questions that I anticipate either you have or you might ask or you might be wondering about. And one big one that we all face is how much contact and tackling should you have in practice? And there's so much scrutiny. If you look at most of the state high school programs have some rules that are limiting contact, although if you look at the rules, it's almost like a no change for most programs based on the way that the rules were put in place. But with all the attention around head injuries and football in general, there's a lot of scrutiny in this area. And I think probably about 6 years ago, I started to change my approach to football. And I think it was 6 years ago, I think early in the season when I had, I think, 2 broken arms and one other injury either before the first game or within the first week or 2 of the season. And my general philosophy is that the deeper I get into season, the less contact I'm going to have in practice. I think early in the season, this football is a contact sport. The kids need to be prepared to be on the field against other teams and a real opponent. And you have to simulate that early in the season. You've got to do some full speed, full contact scrimmage work early in the season. And so we do that. We do that before our first game. We might do a little bit of that before our second game. But beyond that, we're almost never going to go full contact, full tackling. And we'll move to, at the most, thud level contact as we get deeper into the season. And the way that I define thud is that it's full speed, it's competitive, there's no guaranteed winner, but the defense is not going to take the ball carrier to the ground, and we're gonna blow quick whistles. The best way you can control impact and contact is by controlling the distance that players have before contact happens. So open field tackling drills where you let kids get 15 to 20 yards of steam before they hit it is much more likely to produce an injury than starting the kids 3 to 5 yards apart from each other. And there's no perfect answer to that, but that's the best way that I know to manage impact. And the deeper we get into the season, the less we're even going to do thud level type contact as we get in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tackling stuff as we get into that. So if you have questions about that, go ahead and ask in the chat, and I'll make sure we get to those before the end. Big question number 2, how do you condition players? If you played football growing up, whether it was youth or high school or college, you probably had a certain routine that you grew up with that, is your kind of default go-to approach, which is you're going to run lines, you're going to do a lot of push-ups. Your warm-ups are going to involve some, a lot of leg lifting and crunches, and it's almost like you're running a CrossFit Jim, with football. And, that stuff I'm a big fan of conditioning. It's important that kids get conditioned, but with 6 hours of time with a youth football team, this is not high school where I may have, an hour of weight room and some explosive conditioning work that I can do, whether it's, running or lifting. We don't have that kind of time and contact with the kids in youth football. So I take a very different approach. Stop running gassers. Stop running lines. There are better ways to achieve that same kind of aerobic conditioning. And my favorite is doing on-air plays. If you condition with practice tempo, with aggressive reps and small groups, moving kids quickly, you're going to keep their heart rates up throughout the whole practice. If you use on-air plays, you're going to get the same kind of conditioning you get with lines, but the kids are using their brains. They have fun with it. Some of the kids get pretty beat up. I've seen kids have to pull themselves out. But to me, that's a sign that they're getting the same kind of aggressive conditioning that they would with running lines. But they're having to think and run plays and try to execute correctly, which sets them up well for game situation. I'm going to give you a quick link here to a post I wrote a little while back that might help you out. Similar to the on-air plays, there's a drill that I've run for a few years called the bandit drill. And I didn't invent this. I think it might have been Mike Leach that came up with this, or he probably stole it from somebody else. There's not much new under the sun in football. But bandit drill is a competitive offense versus defense 2-minute drill where your goal is to attack the end zone with 9 consecutive plays, moving across the hashes at 5-yard or 10-yard increments, depending on whether you've got the full field or a half field. I often only have half the field. And you put in some penalties like docking a team for a turnover or having a false start. And you build 2 separate squads that run against each other. And you're trying to see how fast they can work their way into the end zone with 9 perfect plays, executing all the way through. And again, you have to script it. And I create 2 separate scripts, and the kids love this. It's competitive. It's how we end our practices. It gets us used to kind of a 2-minute drill situation. But at the same time, we continue to condition the kids. Another question is, how do you leverage no pad, no contact time? You might be running some clinics this time of year. I'm running some Sunday clinics for some rising freshmen that are going to be playing high school next year, and we're not in pads. You can work on tackling and tackling progressions without pads. And if you went and watched Pete Carroll's hawk tackling thing that he put out last year, I thought that was great. And he actually demonstrates how you can do that without pads. And I put together, the videos are great, but I needed a kind of a little cheat sheet for how to run those drills. So I put together a sheet that I just put in the chat that you can go download and maybe make use of it. And then you have if you follow USA Football, they have their heads up tackling progression, which is, the way I look at that heads up program is that it's not incompatible with the hawk tackling. There's some slight differences in approach, but a lot of the heads up techniques are great for working on that initial stance, getting to a good kind of linebacker breakdown stance and how to approach the engagement on the tackle and keeping that heads up. But we use those hawk tackling drills throughout the whole season. And this is not does not have scientific significance, but this is the first year I have not had any concussions on one of my teams for the entire season. And we had a very good defense, and we had very good tackling execution. So I'm a big fan of that Pete Carroll hawk tackling progression, and you can teach all that without pads. And you can do even the contact and the roll tackle with a shield, and just work on form fit and positioning. You can do all, obviously running back and QB drills. A lot of the O-line stuff you can do on bags. You can do a lot of step work, and obviously all kind of the 7-on-7 and pass routes and coverage drops you can do as well. All right, so this big question about how you can use parent helpers is, I think, is part of this. What do you do if you don't have enough coaches? At some point, you may need to reach out to parents to help out, and there's kind of a few different ways to approach that. The easiest way is when you just get them involved holding bags and kind of just being out there and essentially being kind of a tackling dummy, and that's usually pretty easy. I say there's maybe one exception, which is that at times, and I've gone down and helped some younger youth teams, which is, it's usually with these kind of 8th and 9th grade teams where maybe you have new coaches that haven't kind of built a full staff around them. They often get some parents coming in holding bags, and very often these parents they're pretty knowledgeable. They might have played some college football. They watch a lot of football on Saturday and Sunday, and they want to help. The problem there can be is these parents that are holding bags think that they're coaches, and they start trying to teach kids. And very often that guidance is going to be inconsistent with what you're trying to teach as a head coach. So you do need to be careful with that. Having parents run drills is harder. It's harder because it's harder to keep the kids safe. It's harder because it's unlikely that they're going to be consistent with how you're running it. Doesn't mean you can't do it. To do it successfully, what I like to do is make it easy by making drill cards that clearly walk you through how to run a particular drill. And ideally get those parents to show up early so that you can give them some guidance. And sometimes you find you might be able to develop a new assistant coach this way. Maybe you can get them together on a weekend or a Sunday, between your game and your next practice, and walk them through some of this. Sometimes parents, they're afraid, they're reluctant to step up, but with a little bit of support and guidance, you might be able to get the kind of support that you need. The flip side of that is don't be afraid to fire somebody. I've got a classic story of a guy who was not a really good friend of mine, but somebody I knew pretty well, that came on when our boys were in the 7th grade as an assistant coach. And he has a very talented son who's getting ready to play he's recruited D1 athlete. And this dad was so involved with his own kid that he would be running a drill, coaching a different position, looking across the field, watching his own kid and yelling at his own kid while he's running his own station. And we went through an extensive feedback process. We tried to coach him up and say, if you're going to be a coach, you need to kind of forget that you have your own kid out there. But he couldn't do it. So we had to fire him. We did it in the most supportive way we could, but he basically was not invited to come back and coach with us. I'd rather have a parent helper there that's going to be maybe a little less knowledgeable, but I know is going to be watching the kids that he or she is responsible for, and will do their best to run the drill that's in front of them. All right, so I told you before that I'd come back to special teams, and there's no doubt special teams are a third of the game. If you're coaching at the high school, college, or NFL level, and you don't focus on this properly, you will not be successful. I don't think those rules are quite the same at the youth level. First of all, I think it's a perfectly rational approach in youth football to not punt. Very few good things come from punting, and a lot of bad stuff comes from punting. Block punts. You're putting usually their best ball carrier in the open field with kids that don't have the practice time to understand coverage, and it's a recipe for disaster. So my only punt play that I've run for the last probably 5 years is a pass run, kick option, rugby style punt, where the punter is instructed to do everything he can to not punt it, but if he has to, punt it out of bounds, and the goal is to get it 15 to 20 yards down the field. And we consider that a win. So that's a great way to avoid eating practice time for that, is just don't punt. And there are, as you've probably read, there are quite a few high school coaches out there that don't even punt. We live in a world of onside kicks. If you coach youth football, I've seen this trend the last 2 or 3 years. We might practice kick return from a deep kick twice the entire season. And this is a guy who, 6 years ago, I put in this amazing wedge trap return kick that was very successful. But guess what? If teams only kick deep to you 3 times a year, why are you spending time on that? So we focus on recovery of onside kicks, and that's very important. And then unless I have a kicker that can put it in the end zone, I'm going to spend all of my kickoff time working on onside kicks. It's just, I've done the data analysis myself. I'm an engineer and a numbers geek, and the data supports that in youth football, kicking deep and punting just generally doesn't have a good return. And the only way you need to evaluate this is look at what yard line the opponent starts on and how often do you actually recover the ball. And 1 out of 5 recoveries of onside kicks is almost guaranteed to be better than 5 attempted deep kicks. You can make it fun for the kids with onside kicks. You can put in some fun different things. With our punt play, it's really a trick play, and the kids enjoy running that play, so it keeps them engaged. Another tip that I would give you is that, particularly for kickoff and kick return, your big kids, we call them stripers in Sherwood and in this area because they have to wear a stripe on their helmet because they're not eligible to run the ball or be an eligible receiver. They're not likely to be on your kickoff or kick return team. So we're often running offensive line or defensive line drills concurrently with our kickoff and kick return. So that's a great way to make better use of your practice time. All right, so a few other common problems, then I'll go and address any other questions that you guys might have. Let's say you've only got 18 players on your team, or maybe you even have 22, but you can't get good matchups and get a good either scout offense or scout defense. If you haven't tried it, run a half line. So you might run, inside running plays to the right, or just all running plays to the right, and you're only going to run on your offensive side your center, right guard, right tackle, tight end, and your backfield. And that lets you move maybe your starting left guard and left tackle and maybe a few other better players onto the defensive side, so that you get some better matchups and you get some better aggression and interplay there between your number one players. That's the best recipe when you just don't have enough players to build a balanced front. If you do the things that I've talked about with reducing contact in the season, not running lines and doing kind of traditional stuff, if you got some parents who've been around football for a while, they might complain. They might say, you're not running them enough, or why aren't you running lines, or why aren't you running Oklahoma for the last 30 minutes, or doing bull in the ring or whatever. Step one is probably to ignore them. And that's probably why I'm not good with the parents. But you probably want to set expectations off early in the season and just explain how you're going to approach it, why, that it's based on the latest evidence, and that we will get good results, and our kids will know, they will be conditioned, they will know how to tackle, they will not be afraid of contact, and we'll observe that in games. You might, especially if you're coaching some older kids, you get some new players that show up and they might be really far behind the other players. We, from time to time, and this is something that often our head coach will do, is break out some of these players into very individualized instruction. We may have a couple, brand new offensive line players that, while the other kids are working combo blocks and cross blocking and sweep pulls, these other kids can't even get into a stance, and they can't execute a simple down or reach block. we'll break those kids out. And again, it takes the right amount of adults to pull this off. But particularly early in the season, we will do this. The later it goes in the season, we often will just have to move on from that, because you just can't take away time from players who've been keeping up. And there's a point at which you can't coach the middle. You got to coach to the kids who are putting in the time and learning throughout the season. All right, I have one final poll for you guys, and then we'll go to some of the questions that you guys have raised. Oh, and I guess I've got another giveaway that I promised you guys that I'll send over. So this is the last survey that I'd like you to do, and this one, this survey is really a feedback for me from this clinic here. What do you think you'll implement in the coming season? If you got some ideas, what jumps out at you in terms of something that, wow, that sounds really cool. I think I want to try that this season. Just go ahead and type into that text box and click submit, and I'd love to get your feedback on that. All right. Before we answer some of the questions, I suspect most of you are probably running a different offense. I'm a big fan of this old school offense called the wing T. And, I put out a book earlier this year. It's called The Wing T for Youth Football. I think it's a pretty unique value. It not only has the offense that I've been running for many years, but it's got over 40 videos, including play videos, drills, a whole bunch of resources around installation guidance. And if you're thinking about running the wing T, or if you've got, maybe you're a hybrid offense and you've got some wing T concepts you want to put in, I think there's room for jet sweep and some of the trap and kind of classic wing T concepts in just about any offense. So feel free to check that out. If you go to my website, there's even a free belly series playbook you can download to kind of get a sense of what my material is about, and you can see if that might be suitable for you. And then let me give you a couple more things here that I'll link to down in the chat. The first is the sample practice plans. I've got two. There's one as a PDF you can download, but I didn't really get into the technology for how we do a lot of our planning. I've become a big fan of Google Docs. It's a great way to collaborate on documents without having to email, Word docs or Excel files around. And I'm giving you a link in that last one to a copy of a whole set of plans that I've used in that Google Doc form that you can save and kind of repurpose for your own use if you think it might be helpful. If you have any problems getting access to any of these things that I'm sharing here, just go ahead and shoot me an email after the clinic, and I'll make sure we get you squared away. All right, so again, if you have more questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box, and I'm going to go and loop back to some of the questions that some folks raised in the clinic so far. The big one was, what should I do if I don't have enough coaches, yourself and one assistant? Well, I think it's hard to coach a football team with two coaches, but it can be done. It kind of depends on the size of your team. If I were in your shoes and I didn't have the opportunity to bring in some more parent helpers, I would think carefully about how I'm going to construct my drill routines to keep the kids as engaged as possible. For me, because I'm an offensive line coach, it means when I'm doing a lot of my step work and progressions, I'm going to have every player engaged in a lot of the drills at the same time. and try to watch as many of them at once as I can, but everybody's engaged. And if you look at some of the drills I have in my book, you can see examples of how, let's say I have eight linemen that I'm working with. I'm running 4 separate lines at a time, with just 2 pairs, a pair of players in each line, so that they're doing quick reps, back to back to back, and I'm able to, as one coach, be watching, 8 players, and I could easily scale that to 12 or so. I think I will say, though, I'm just going to maintain that 2 is pretty tough, and I think your first priority would be to work with parents of the players you have on your team, and try to ease a willing participant. And let's talk about choice A or choice B. Choice A is a coach who, was a D1 college player who knows everything about football. His kid's the stud player on the team, and he wants to come out and help and show how good he is. Versus Coach B, who's somebody who, looks to be somebody who's organized and is going to listen and get aligned with your program, but maybe doesn't have some great football experience. I'll take Coach B any day of the week. And I'm not saying completely avoid Coach A, because some of those Coach A's can be turned around, but it's more important that somebody has a supportive, caring attitude, is going to listen to the head coach and get in line with the program, and is somebody that the kids are going to listen to. All right, and if there's follow-ups as I go on, I can't remember who asked that, but go ahead and feel free to ask any follow-ups. The next one was, does Coach XO sell those scout cards only? He does not, and I don't think he will, but that installation book is worth it, even if you're not going to run the 3-5-3, because the pass coverage concepts and how to defend 4 verticals, how to protect against these seam routes, it's worth it even if you're not going to run that as your base front. Just get it. It's one of the best playbook investments I've made in years. And here I am telling you to go buy somebody else's book besides mine, but I think having those templates that he has in there are just, they're worth it. You can draw them up yourself. It's not that hard to do it, especially if you have huddle. But you got to think about how you're going to spend your own time. There was kind of more of a football specific question that came up, which is, I noticed in the playbook you have reach block on sweep. What do you think about down blocking on sweep instead? So that's so my answer to that is, I love down blocking on sweep, and I think that's my default, is to use. If you look at the classic wing T sweep, which is the buck sweep, we block down from the wing back to the tight end, the tackle. Their rule is all to block down to their inside gap, and we pull and kick out with the play side guard. The center is going to reach to cover for that guard, and the backside guard is going to pull and log. If we're not going to pull interior guards, if we're dealing with 8 or 9 defenders in the box and they're blitzing A gaps or reading guards, then we'll do a power sweep, which is where we'll have the whole line all the way to wing back reach to play side, and we will lead with our fullback instead of fake and trap with that fullback. So that's kind of the 2 answers I have on that. So we do both, and I hope that's helpful. All right, well, I don't see any more questions. Hey, I hope this was helpful for you. Thanks for being there. Thanks for asking questions and being engaged. And you'll see a follow-up email from me shortly with an invitation to join my newsletter, which is where you'll hear about future webinars like this, and find out about more materials and stuff that might be of help to you. So thank you, and I hope to be running another one in June. I'm going to be relocating from Oregon out to the East Coast in a few weeks, but I should be up and running by mid-June and ready to run my next clinic. So hopefully I'll see you then. Take care, everybody.